Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I'm Zach. And next up, listener questions about making training adjustments, what to do about plateauing, and more. And in the world of running, U.S. 10,000 meter team champs, stars in Eugene, and high school studs in California. Well, in case you would like your questions answered on air, we do that, just like this episode. And you can submit them very easily simply by going to atozrunning.com/question.
Yeah, you can do that. We love connecting with you. We're also on Instagram. And I had posted something kind of silly. It had a bunch of different emoji faces and different related runner things that go with those emojis.
You posted a bunch of emojis?
On like a picture.
Just a picture of emojis?
He's not on social media. He doesn't understand. But there was the angry face, and that was associated with being chased by a goose, because a lot of runners have been chased by geese, and it is obnoxious, and it can be a little frightening. Well, we got a couple great tips from some of you about how to get rid of these geese. Yeah, Gretchen says her husband barks at the geese, and it works every time for him.
At the geese. Like Mark. Mark recently said that as well.
So it must work if both of them are suggesting it.
I guess.
But if that doesn't work, Liz says to hiss at them. Hiss. So you have a couple different options there.
You're going to have some serious projection of that hissing for the geese to even notice it.
To your breath capacity.
Matter of fact, I have tried that. They don't notice when I do that. They do notice when I throw things at them.
Oh,
especially hypothetically.
Well, I actually told everyone that he has thrown a stick at a goose.
Hypothetically.
And a pedestrian got angry at Zach for doing so, but I took a poll, and you had all said, actually 100% of you who responded said that it was acceptable if a goose was approaching you and hissing, that it was acceptable to throw a stick at it. That might not be something, you might be feeling a little angered right now, and I'm sorry about that. But we try not to hurt any geese. We just try to fend them off, because they can be very territorial and aggressive.
Or they may have in the future the potential of sometimes eventually being aggressive, and as a consequence ought to be fended off.
We digress.
In theory.
Let's talk about some upcoming races. Brian Deemer, family of races. We talked to the Brian Deemer last week on our podcast, and there is a race coming up. 5K, a steeplechase, a kids race, and that's on June 11th. I think the steeplechase is
also a kids race.
Yeah, it's 1K. And the GVSU Redemption Track Meet, that's also in the evening of the 11th. So if you're looking for something on the shorter side on the track, you can look that up too. So
or if you just
a couple opportunities in the West Michigan area. So we will link to that at AtoZrunning.com.
Absolutely. And by the way, if you're ever in the interest of receiving more promotions and discounts on the kinds of things we talk about, be it races or products or otherwise, remember that we do indeed share those kinds of things regularly with our email subscribers. And so if you're not on the digest list, it is, of course, free to subscribe. So why wouldn't you be? But remember that you're missing out if you're not on that list. You can be very easily by going to AtoZrunning.com and looking for the word follow.
Well, with that, let's move on to our main topic where we answer your questions.
All right, so now for listener Q&A episode. This is my favorite episode, by the way. I don't know if I've said that before.
You've said it a few times, yeah.
Not this one specifically, but like anytime we do episodes answering your questions, which we do every month, and you can have your questions answered. Remember, just go to atozrunning.com/question to submit a question.
And we will try to.
I said can, not will.
All right.
Grammar matters. All right, and the reason why this is my favorite episode is because this is the kind of stuff that I personally like doing the most, which is just talking with runners about running stuff.
That's why you became a coach.
I also happen to think that I have all the right answers.
Oh.
So
that's why I'm here.
I like answering the questions. No, I'm only partially kidding, because why would we do this if we didn't think we had some kind of value to add?
Well, we are always looking at the research, and we are having great guests on the show. So we're always adding to what we know, and you help us do that by asking questions that, we are able to digest and give you full answers for.
Oh, that's very gracious of you, Andi. trying to hedge Zach's arrogance here, which is probably a good idea.
It's my job.
So this first question comes from Carl in Michigan, and Carl is asking about electrolytes. This is an interesting question. I kind of like it because it's very precise. So he wrote, I have a question. Several times you have discussed, which is true, we have, nutrition while running. I've also heard you talk about electrolyte replacement. In the past, I seem to have equated the two, but I don't think that's fair. You're right, Carl. That's not quite fair. And we do that too, so we're not being fair either. My question, Carl writes, is when you talk about fasted running, especially on long runs, are you talking about electrolytes as well as nutrition? Should I be replacing electrolytes? Is there a benefit to training with electrolytes? I guess I'm just wondering if electrolytes get lumped into nutrition or if they're totally independent of each other. And then naturally, your question is an important one because there's multiple different considerations here. So thank you for asking.
And first of all, I think he meant zero fuel runs, not fasted.
Yeah, and that's another part. We could spend a lot of time trying to address and clarify some of these. It's like
taking nutrition on the run. Versus
right. So we talk a lot with athletes in general about how you train energy systems, and there are different kinds of ways, and depending on what you are trying to accomplish and what you need, there are different ways to go about that. However, we don't usually, whenever we talk about that, talk about the difference between hydration and nutrition. And so this is why I appreciate Carl's question, because I haven't really tried to bring that up before. So that's the separation, and that is intriguing. So here's what we think about that. The first thing is, in terms of like energy system training, that is not a hydration related thing. That's like a fueling related thing. And so hydration, you want to have optimal hydration all the time. You really never want to intentionally dehydrate yourself in training. That's not good.
No.
It actually diminishes the training effects of your work, but also it's very dangerous and unhealthy.
And the functions of your body.
And all the other stuff, yeah. And your mind, for that matter. Yeah. So everything. You want to be well hydrated all the time. And so as a consequence, and this is one of the questions that comes up every time we talk with runners about fueling and not fueling and like preparing for marathon races and these kinds of things, it's almost always like, should I fuel or not? But then if I don't fuel, should never then be I'm never going to take anything at all, because that, of course, potentially raises the risk of dehydrating ourselves like on hot, humid runs, or as Todd Buckingham, PhD, recently reminded us, things like, heavy sweaters produce a significantly greater rate of dehydration in the same effort and conditions as someone who simply sweats less. So these are good things to be thinking about. So yes, electrolyte replacement is an essential component of making sure that you're staying optimal in terms of the efforts that you're giving in training. And so if you find, and there's a whole lot of, Carl, you're asking the question, so I'm going to speak directly to you. If you find that you're having issues, especially with long runs, you're noticing that you're sweating heavily, or I have greater issues when I run in hotter or humid conditions, and I don't seem to have any issues when I do the same amount of time and effort in something cooler, right? All that kind of stuff, which, by the way, is just like basically normal for everyone. So we should all probably relate somewhat to that. So then the question is that because I'm dehydrating too much and I need to try to address that? And this is where I would answer it in two ways. The first is hydration is not an immediate thing. Like you don't take a drink of water and suddenly you're hydrated better than you were 5 minutes ago. It's something that is built into your system over periods of time. So like what I'm doing today in terms of the water that I'm drinking and hydration practices helps me tomorrow, or at least there's some amount of hours of effect there. But then there's also the side of like, if I'm expending myself severely and like sweating heavily and things like that, then there's a more immediate replenishment that can happen too. So the point I'm trying to make then is the difference lies in the contents of what you're consuming. So hydration is primarily water. We know that. However, it's not just water. And this is where, a little bit of research. We always like to do a little bit of research when we're answering these kinds of questions. And there's a term, and I found it initially, I was trying to remember it because I had encountered this when I was talking once with my dad, as it were, about he got dehydrated once when he was working outside in the summer all day. He was doing some deck work, right? Got dehydrated. And he was talking to his doctor, and he's like, how did that happen? I was drinking water all day long, like tons of water. And his doctor said, Were you drinking just plain water? And he said, well, yes, of course, because it's water. It hydrates you. Well, no. In fact, what happens is if you're drinking just water and you're not replenishing sodium, then you dilute the sodium content of your blood. And when you dilute your sodium content, you enter what is called hyponatremia. That's a state where you have diluted sodium content in your blood. And the sodium is what helps the water transfer in and out of cells. So
that's why people take salt tabs.
That's
and
it.
Have electrolyte drinks. Like I drink Noon.
Yeah.
That's what I like to use.
So that was a very long response to get to a simple point. You need more than just water.
And also
and you should.
I wanted to mention, because Zach was talking about like hydration throughout the day and the day before. If you're someone who has a hard time staying hydrated, it's a good idea when you are training through the summer. If you know that you haven't been on top of your hydration needs, to bring your hydration with you, just for even like trying to get it in for your daily value, because sometimes having it on the run will like make you drink more. So anyway, I'm just putting that out there too, that it could also be looking at the day as a whole, and maybe it's a run that normally I wouldn't need to bring any for. Like maybe I am going for like an 8-mile run and I normally wouldn't need to bring water, but I haven't been hydrating through the day, so I need to bring it with me.
Well, that's one of the other aspects, too, is the water that you're drinking on the run is going to help you in your recovery phase after the run as well. So there's a piece of that, too. That's a good comment, Andy. Now, let's think about then, what do I do about this? So what if I want to hydrate well, but I don't want to be consuming like fuel, energy system fuel stuff? So then you think about, let's use an example.
Like Noon.
Well, okay, so we'll get there, too. But let's think about Gatorade for a moment. So Gatorade is 3 ingredients, right? It's water, sodium, and sugar with a tiny bit, a negligible amount of potassium, but it is indeed negligible. So water, sugar, and sodium, right? So the water and sodium is to hydrate you. The sugar is to give you energy. That's all Gatorade is, and that's all it was ever intended to be. Well, I guess food coloring too, and stuff like that. But the point is simply that take the sugar out of that equation, and you have your basic hydration elements, water and sodium, right? Now, you can also, it just so happens, acquire those things in other ways, and this is where pickle juice gained its popularity. And this is really an important reflection here, because the reason why pickle juice rose in popularity in running is because it was an easy way to acquire water and sodium in fairly high quantities without some of the energy side effect stuff, because we know that things like sugar, especially fructose and some of those kinds of sugars, those things are not great fuel supplies anyway. We don't process them very well, and so you have like the sugar spike and drop that people always comment about from Gatorade, and it also tends to cause like digestive distress and some of that kind of stuff. So people started to find out in the running world that pickle juice seems to help me feel better without those kinds of energy spike and slump experiences that we sometimes get from things like Gatorade. And then companies got more creative, like Noon and some of the others. The main point I want to make here is that if you're looking for, in Carl's question here, if you're looking for something to hydrate you well, but you're not wanting to mess around with energy stuff, maybe you're doing that in a different way, or maybe that's just not part of what you're trying to accomplish at that moment, then look for an option that has sodium with its water and little else, essentially. And there are other things certainly that you can. I mean, it's never a bad idea to have some potassium and magnesium in that, for instance. And it certainly is good to have some other vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. But avoid the carbohydrate sources and some of that kind of stuff for the, that's energy system. That's not hydration. So,
but some drinks have mixes and things like that. So you just need
most are combinations of everything.
Yeah. So that will all depend on your purposes. But
and let me just simply say, because I was saying, so like Gatorade has a 0 sugar Gatorade. That's basically just everything except for that sugar, but it still tastes sweet. Why? Because it has artificial sweeteners. Still not a good thing. Mm-hmm. Better to have something natural like pickle juice that doesn't have artificial sweeteners than water, sodium, and aspartame or whatever it is.
All right, Zach.
Okay.
That was pretty thorough.
Great question, Carl. I liked that. All right. Now this one from Adam.
Yeah, Adam from Instagram. I'm not really sure where he's from. Hey,
he's from Instagram.
From Instagram.
Obviously.
The land of Instagram. Hey, fellow runners. Do you have an episode of yours that addresses a weird point I've gotten to? I'm not getting fast. I actually slowing down, and my legs are hurting and they aren't recovering well. I've been running 5 days a week for the last 2 years, typically running 5 to 10 Ks and one long run on the weekend, but thought I've been listening to my body well to rest. Thanks for all you're doing and the resources you provide. You're welcome, Adam.
Okay. Well, Adam, we have to make a few assumptions here because we're missing some of the data that would help us answer more directly. So we don't know your age. We're assuming age is not the defining factor here, because naturally, if we're talking about over the course of a long period of time that you're trying to describe here, then it could well be the case that you're training too hard for your current capacity or something like that. But we don't know that. So then we have to look at it from one of three areas in our experience. One is training. What are you doing in training? 2 is sleep and things like that, your rest. And 3 is nutrition.
And then, 4 is life.
Well, yes.
And other variables like, stressors that are on your life, maybe a change of job or something in your life that may make a difference.
I'm assuming you're describing a protracted period of time, and so that could or could not be an influencing factor. But yeah, true. So assuming none of that and sleep are not the issues here, if you're not getting quality sleep regularly, nothing else is going to work very well. So definitely make sure that you're doing that. But let's talk about training, because I'm guessing this is in fact the source of your situation.
We've talked to many people about plateauing, but we've never talked about it on the podcast. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to answer Adam's question, to delve into it a little bit, and maybe we will delve into it even more at another date.
So the primary assumption here is because we have 2 points of data that you've given us that are really key. The first is that you are not improving, if not getting slower, you mentioned. And the second is that you're feeling badly, like you're not recovering well, your legs are hurting. These are the things you described, Adam. So almost guaranteed you're doing one or both of the following things. You're running your easy days too hard, or your hard days too hard, or both. Probably both. And why do we know that? Because when you do that for long periods of time especially, a number of things tend to happen. So let me just try to outline and describe this. First, if you're young, you get away with it. That's point blank. If you're young, you get away with overtraining and still excelling, because the human body, especially when it's young and youthful, does incredible things, and it's quite amazing. But when you're no longer super young, then you don't get away with it anymore. And so what we tend to notice is when you run when you run too hard on the easy days, that's going to reduce the training potential and the adaptations for both the easy days and the hard days. It's reducing the training potential of the easy days because you're overdoing it, and so you're not able to recover enough between efforts. And so those easy days are at a depleted state, or more depleted state. And then, of course, it's reducing the value of the hard days because you haven't recovered between your hard days, and now you're running hard again while you're in that depleted state. So everything is less effective. Now, like I said, that you get away with that when you're young. And for a time, I don't know exactly how old you are, but most people tend to find right around their mid-20s, they stop getting away with that. And that can vary quite a bit by person. But the point is you don't usually get away with it for long. And so in that instance, you'll notice you'll be improving, and then after a while, and it's years we're talking about, suddenly you stop improving as much, and you don't feel good hardly at all. And this is about the time when most of those runners assume that they've just kind of spent their running competitiveness, and they kind of like quit. They call it quits and retire and things like that. You see a lot of college runners do that. They run great in college, and then out of college, they have a year or 2 or 3 where they're just like going out and hammering the roads and feeling great doing it and loving it, and then suddenly they're done. And for many of them, this is the scenario. Now, on the other side of that, the running the hard days too hard, whether or not you're doing the easy days too easy or easy enough, is another scenario that tends to come up here, because then if you're going too hard on hard days, so I'm assuming by too hard, we're getting close to talking about you're doing things in an anaerobic capacity too often. Because what happens there then is that you induce the need for greater period of time in recovery, but you're not actually taking a greater period of time in recovery, even if you're going easy on the easy stuff. You said you're running 5 days a week, so we're assuming that you have some time between hard efforts, but not enough insofar as you're doing another hard effort. And even if you do, and this is the key piece here, even if you are recovering enough between your hard efforts, you're constantly going too hard into an anaerobic state, and you're not conditioning your aerobic development well. And over time, that tends to produce negative training effects over long periods of time, we're talking about, because the anaerobic system only works as a percent potential of your aerobic system. Like you can't, especially, I guess if you're doing like 200s and 400s and stuff, then we're talking about something different. But if you're racing 5Ks or 10Ks or something of that nature, you need to have high aerobic development, because the anaerobic system only is going to function give you value if it's based off high aerobic development.
So I'm going to take it from another angle here. When we talked to Dr. Todd, he said you can't have the peaks without the valleys. And we talked on our podcast with Jed Christensen about periodization in running. So you could be in a slump because you are doing the same thing all the time. And it's very possible that you, one, are never taking an adequate rest in between cycles, like you're doing a hard race and you just go into the next cycle without recovering, or you're just not injecting enough new stimulus or changing enough in order to have adaptation. So when we talk about periodization in running, it's very strategic in how you plan your cycle. So I'll link to that episode about periodization in running as well.
That's good stuff. Now, to be clear, if you were only doing good aerobic conditioning all the time, you would still be improving. You wouldn't probably be racing as crisply as you could if you also then conditioned some fine-tuning around the race goals.
But rest is important.
Right.
So if you're feeling burnt out and you're feeling like you feel bad every single day, it might be time to look and see if you need to do a reset on your run.
Truth. Mm-hmm. How about George?
George from Michigan. And he writes, "Hey, A to Z, what tips would you have for my mindset going forward in my current situation? That is, I have a very strong base period from January to May and some build. Despite a few hiccups,"
sorry, hit the wrong button,
"intercostal muscle strain, some hip glute pain, he ran a very strong 10K in May. I was looking to peak in mid-June for some triathlons, but will be traveling overseas during most of June now for work. Goal races will now be late July and August. Should I take a break? What part of a training cycle would you suggest I return to? Thanks for taking listener questions."
I like this because the answer here is going to be very precise, very specific to this situation. So anyone listening who is not George from Michigan, take note about the key considerations and understand that you may have a similar kind of situation, but not necessarily want to make the same kind of adjustment that we're describing here. So here are the key considerations. George is in a situation where he has built strong condition. So that's great, George. Establishing a good base puts you in the position to be able to then get yourself into race shape effectively. So we always talk about that kind of stuff, like that has to happen first. And he's done that well. And so this is good. And he's even got proof of it. So he ran a really strong 10K performance off of that base training. And now he's thinking to himself, I was primed to be able to like really get after race shape, but now I have this disruption. So we've got that. But then the other consideration is he also has in the near future on the horizon the potential for a goal race season still. That's not terribly far off. And within the midst of that, the thing that's disrupting him is travel and severe time demand, like work-related types of stuff, right? Okay, so within this situation, there's one potential caveat. So he's asking, should he just take a break and then try to like prime in a short amount of time for races? My one caveat is I'm assuming that you don't have to take this time completely off. Like you have the option of being able to train, but in a reduced capacity because of the travel, because of the time, things like that. Okay, so I'm going to make that assumption, George. And now being the case, if you're in a situation like this, this is the very specific consideration that could be indeed really helpful. So here's what you want to do. All right. You want to use the few weeks where you're in the very busy travel period as if you were still peaking and running your goal race at the end or in the midst of that time. And you want to train in that sense. Why? First, because it's a lower load training. So it's going to take a lot less amount of time to do it. When we talk about like peak phase training stuff, sharpening and fine tuning, some of that kind of work, we reduce the load, we taper for the goal race season, all that kind of stuff. Still do that because that takes a lot of time demand out of the need. Also, it replaces the need for high volumes of aerobic work with high frequency of intensity work, but the volumes can be quite low to still be very valuable. So in this sense, I don't know exactly how many days like per week, for instance, or how many instances you're going to have to take days off, how frequently you're traveling, things like that. But it would seem to me that if you have the intent of doing some amount of training, this is the way you would want to do it. So you do this peak phase within that busy travel season, and you just get these short bouts of intense work, and you do them fairly frequently throughout the time. And you even have, if you can, like some simulated race efforts, as if these were your goal race experiences. Keep them short. They don't need to be long. They don't need to be anything like what you're actually going to do for your goal races later on. They just need to be a race type effort. And so you do a couple of those too. And then after that, when your busiest travel period is done, then you enter what would be a continuation phase. And this is the kind of period of time where you say, basically, I've done my first goal race, but now I've got a few more. And unless you're a marathoner, where you're not really going to string together like 4 or 5 marathons in a row of racing, as some do, but not in this level of like, I'm going all out each time. But in this instance, if you're doing shorter race distances, you can do this. So then you enter this continuation phase where it's still a kind of lighter focus. You're not doing massive loads, but what you're doing is you're doing repetition of intense weeks where you end with basically like, I'm going to run a race this weekend, and then a week or two later, I'm going to run another race. And you basically just do that for the next 4 to 6 weeks through that period of when you would then have your goal races instead.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Would you still be doing a long run every week?
No, you could, but not. It's helpful to keep some load in there because the more in touch you can stay with the aerobic stimulus, the less likely you'll see diminishing returns on your aerobic work. But in the same sense, I'm assuming you don't have the time to. So no, if you don't have the time to, don't. Go for the intensity instead of the load at this point.
Interesting.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All right. Donnie from Michigan. She asks, I just ran my first marathon. Congrats, Donnie.
Congrats.
She's actually my sister. I'm
look
gonna
at that.
tell everybody that.
Family.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm very proud that she ran her first marathon. And she says it went very well. And while I'm a little sore, nothing is terrible. How long should I take a break from running, and what should I do to get started again?
Well, congrats on the first marathon.
Yeah.
We all know what those feel like, and it's a very different experience for everyone, as it were.
It went really well for her, actually. So I'm excited for her to be eager to get back at it like she is.
I don't know that she's asking about her next marathon here, but so we're not going to assume that, Donnie. Now, what we notice here is a very common experience. So you come out of a big race effort like a marathon, and now, what should I do next? This could be the case whether it's your first or your 100th marathon. The answer largely is the same. So we have to then look at your specific situation. And anytime you're talking about rest periods and rebuilding periods and such, that becomes very individualistic. So in this instance, Donnie, feeling pretty good after the race. Definitely no obvious, I don't have an acute problem like an injury or pain as a result of things. Just the kind of the general soreness that comes with covering 26 miles, and that's a substantial thing. So a couple of things to think about. First, do the stuff that helps you speed up recovery in general. That's always good to do, like long walks on the beach. Oh, no, wait, that's something else. Long walks, icing, anti-inflammatory stuff, those kinds of good things. Gentle mobility, some of that is good, because then that's going to help you just kind of see how you're feeling truly once you get past the the race has made my body feel like not great for a while. So then after that, then you have to think about two aspects. And this is what we talk to all of our runners about after a goal race season is done. Now I'm taking a break period. There's two things on your mind. The first is, how is your body feeling? You always want to remember, you do not want to try to run if you cannot run naturally. And this is a really interesting reflection for many marathoners, because you tend to feel like you just can't move quite normally for a while after the race. For some, it's a few days. For others, it's a couple weeks. It just kind of depends. I recall that one time after a marathon, I tried to run like 2.5 or so weeks later, and I felt like I was like basically trying to hobble without bending anything. It's kind of the way it felt. And I knew right away, like, this is not good. Like, this isn't working. So I need to do some other things before I'm ready to run. And that was good, because it definitely took a lot longer than that still. Now, so you need to be able to run naturally before you really try to start running again. And so if you can't, then doing things like the walks and jog walks a little bit here and there are great ways to help move in that direction. The second one is not about your physiology at all, but how do you feel about the idea of running when you think about running again? And so this is the one where we talk with runners, and it's so many will say things like, oh, I do not want to, let's not talk about running right now. And it's like, okay, good, don't run then. Take your time off, because clearly there's something that's, just
do other things,
good.
Try other things.
Yeah.
Go kayaking, go for a bike ride, try something new.
And that's the key piece is like, is it I want to be active and do something, but the idea of running is terrible, then yeah, definitely go do something else. Or is it like I think about moving and I think, oh, that sounds bad. Then don't, reduce your level of activity a bit and give yourself some time to rest some more.
But while still providing blood flow, because you don't want to get into a point where you're so stiff that the reason you don't want to move is because your body feels so stiff.
Do not be sedentary.
Yes.
Yep. Okay, so in thinking about those two things, then, Donnie, most runners find that it takes 1 to 2 weeks before those two things align, where I like the idea of running again, and I feel like I can do it now. I can move properly in order to accomplish that. Also, for most of us, if we have things like tears in the muscle tissues and soft tissues and such from the race, which almost always there's some degree of that, we need 1 to 2 weeks, usually it's 2, to fully heal those kinds of things. So it tends to be the case that all of that usually happens in about 2 weeks. So most tend to say, take 2 weeks off. That's not bad.
If you have had niggles, and by niggles I mean things that have been bothering you, we've talked to people who've been having some calf issues and some hip issues. And so if you have something that was flaring up during your season, this is a time to really start honing in on what you can do to figure out first what's wrong. So maybe that's seeking out a medical professional if you haven't already, or if you have, really be working on your PT exercises and getting back to full health. So when you start again, you're starting anew and you have figured out what's going on and you're on your road to recovery.
This is good. Then the question, the second half of it, is what to do when I'm ready to get started. So part of it is what Andy was just saying. That's always good. It tends to be helpful. Not that hardly any runners will do this, but it tends to be helpful to like get a little bit of video footage of yourself running. Jump on a treadmill or have someone like video you at the track for a few minutes and then watch it and be like, is that what I usually look like when I run? Just as a way to kind of like get an idea of, am I not quite in normal movement yet? The only reason I ask that is because, or suggest that I should say, one of the things to consider is before you really try to build in running, spend some time doing some strength work, especially because most of us neglect that when we're in our high amounts of training and running phases where we're just basically like, I don't have a lot of time in life, so I'm just going to run. Spend a little bit of time, do the strength work, do some good general strength and mobility. And in doing that, focus on the precision, coordination, stability, that aspect of things. Because then when you do start training again and really building that up, chances are you're going to be doing so even more effectively as well. Now, on the other side of that, also just in general, leg strength is the key first component to any training for runners. Period. The key first component. And so, why is it that we find, Andi, so many runners talk about getting hurt, like an injury, within a few weeks of starting back training after they've taken a break? Where it's like, I just took a bunch of time off. I should be good and healed. And then suddenly, 3 or 4 weeks later, I'm injured. How does that happen?
Yeah, a lot of people are running too fast when they start again. You need to do slow stuff that's super easy starting out, and give your body a time to work on the musculoskeletal without straining it with any kind of other stress.
That is exactly it. So start with jogging or even jog walking. Start with that low effort stuff that helps build the structural strength.
I know this takes so much self-control, guys. I understand that.
Because you feel so good.
You get so excited to be running again, or you have signed up for a race now in the future and you're starting a new cycle and you're geeked about it. It is so hard to be patient. But it is one of the number one things we hear the pro runners say on our podcast: patience and consistency. Those are the things that make up their success in running: patience and consistency. So if you can start off on the right foot.
Can it be the left also?
It can be the left also.
Start off on one of your feet.
You have a higher chance of having a really good cycle.
That is the truth. Let me quantify it for you. I think every runner should spend the first 4 to 5 weeks, 4 to 5 weeks of any return from any situation, and that's minimum 4 to 5 weeks of just jogging. Now, there are plenty of situations where fewer than that is indeed what we would actually recommend.
Or you could do some strides for some neuromuscular.
There's some other fartlecking actually is a great thing to do even during a phase like this, as long as you're very, very deliberate, which many of us are not. And so, read our article about fartleks to understand what I mean by that. But anyway, yes, 4 to 5 weeks potentially of just jogging, like nothing but minimal effort jogging. And then assume after that another 4 to 5 weeks when you're entering into a kind of normal training for conditioning purposes, 4 to 5 more weeks before you really start to feel like you're kind of in the good groove again. And people hate to hear that. Like, really, do you really think it should take me 8 to 10 weeks before I'm like starting to feel like I'm really getting back into the full, like I'm training the way I want to be? And my answer is yes, it should. If you're doing this right, it should. And this is why we need to indeed be very, very patient. There's a lot of nuance around that, and there's a lot of situations where that's not, in fact, the exact case. But per Donnie's question, that's how we would get started again.
That's great. Well, I think now we're going to go on to the world of running. This week in the world of running, I want to start with some congratulations at the Bayshore Marathon. We were able to meet some of you there, our listeners, some of our friends.
So cool. Just running. I like it for this reason when races do this, where you run past each other and just being able to like cheer for each other. Yeah. And then so many of you recognizing, the A to Z running on the shirts and stuff, and hearing that. And that was really, really exciting and a little bit humbling. Like, that's cool.
That's cool.
I'm sorry that I don't know all of your names. That was the first thought that crossed my mind, is like, I wish I could just say your name back to you. But I did not know everyone's name.
So reach out. Let us know if you ran. Let us know if you saw Zach. A few of you already have, so I appreciate that and the connections here. Yes. We want to give a special congratulations to our A to Z runners who raced at Bayshore. Andrea in the full. Andrew paced. Craig ran the full. Dan O was also a pacer. Haley ran the full. Hannah ran the half. And Jacob ran a half PR.
Nice work for 11th in the race. Yeah, nice job,
very
Jacob.
Impressive. Kelly ran the full. Christy in the half. Lewis was a pacer. Mary ran the full. And Pete ran the full. Steve ran the half. And Stephanie ran the half. And then Zach S. got a half PR as well.
Another half marathon PR for 6th overall.
Yeah, in a very competitive race. And then Coach Zach ran the full. He was actually the overall winner and he had mentioned that he enjoyed waving and saying hello to all of you. He ran with the GoPro, and we're hoping, and I'll be nudging him and trying to get him to put that footage on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't found us there yet, please head on over to YouTube and you can subscribe and be looking out for Zach's point of view video of the Bayshore Marathon.
I was not recording the entire time.
No.
Some people thought I was. I would turn on the camera occasionally throughout the race for kind of like an update, show you some cool scenery, record some of the people we were running past. At one point, I recorded the guy next to me that I was racing against. I mean, I didn't ask him permission, but I wouldn't put it on if he was like, no. But anyway, so that kind of stuff. And then I was commenting on the race as it was unfolding. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to splice that footage together with a little bit of additional commentary so you have more of an idea of what was going on than what I said just in that footage. And then we'll put that up on YouTube, and hopefully that'll be a load of fun.
Yeah, I think it will be. It'll be cool to see that footage. I could only see him at the start and the finish, so I'm very eager to see what he went through in the actual race and what many of you went through in the race. It's a beautiful one. I've run the Bayshore Marathon before, but it's always one for views. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous course.
And a little exciting plug preview. I spoke with the competitor. So he and I were running side by side almost the entire race. And so Luke, nice work, Luke. That was an incredible effort. So I asked Luke early in the race, like mile 7 or so, so what's the plan? What's the goal here? What's the strategy? And then I put that on the footage while we were running. So if you want to know that, you got to watch.
You didn't even tell me.
Nope. Yep. So
okay. Well, I'll be nudging Zach to put that up. I also did want to shout out a couple of my family members too. I mentioned Donnie ran the full, George ran the 10K and was 3rd in that. And also my mom ran her 6th marathon. I saw previous guest Dr. Todd, and he ran
2nd in the half.
Nice
work.
And I saw Mike Swinger.
All right.
He was on about zombie drills.
Author of Runner's Fix.
Yes. So it was great to see him there as well. And like I mentioned, so many of you, I wish I could just name you all because it was really thrilling to be able to watch you guys all give such great efforts.
Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Next time we'll try to have one of those big like banner flag things next to our tent, so that you can find us more easily before and after the race and say hello and stuff.
That'd be cool.
And for those who did, by the way, thanks. That was fun.
Yeah, very fun. Well, speaking of fun, it was so fun to watch the recaps and the footage of the close battles at the USATF 10,000 meter championship.
Yeah, so this was exciting, and we mentioned this earlier on. The USA Championships this year is split into 2 different meets. The 10,000 championship is by itself part of a separate event, and then the rest of the track and field championships are on a different date. And that's simply because the U.S. Championships date is only a couple of weeks. It's like 3 weeks before the World Championships, which are held at the same location in the United States, in Eugene, Oregon. And so that being very exciting, but as a consequence, you don't really want to run a 10,000 meters hard, like a couple of weeks apart, if you can avoid it. And so they held just the 10,000 meter championship a little bit in advance.
And some of them like to double into the 5K,
Indeed,
which I heard in post-race interviews that many of them are considering it. Some are planning on it. So
well, yeah, in the Olympics last year, how many of them were qualifiers in both the 5,000 and 10,000 from the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean,
a fair number, which is
quite a few.
Testament to how excellent these athletes truly are.
Yeah, so let's get to this because it's super exciting. And we have linked to the full replay.
You got to watch it.
It's available for free. So I know a lot of you guys
for now. Who knows if that's
true
forever?
I guess I can't promise. But it was heated races in Eugene, and it led to sprint to the finish races on both the men's and women's side, coming down to the final stretch.
Which you'd love to see in a 10,000.
Yeah, I know, right? It's so brutal. Oh. On the men's side, Joe Klecker of OAC. We've had Dathan Ritzenhein as coach on the show a couple times, and many of his teammates. He won over U.S. record holder Grant Fisher in a final kick battle.
Brutal.
Yeah.
It is so great. You got to watch it because you have to see, and I was telling Andy this as we're watching, they're coming around 200 meters to go, which is half a lap, and Grant Fisher's on Joe Klecker's shoulder, and I'm looking at Grant Fisher and I'm thinking, he thinks right now that he's got this one because he's in exactly the spot he wants to be. He's on his shoulder around the entire curve so that he can sling outside or on the back or on the final straight. and then just charge home. And he does exactly that. But he doesn't beat him because Joe Klecker holds on.
Joe Klecker,
whoa,
he was like looking over at him. It was pretty thrilling to watch. But they were neck and neck, and then Joe just had the final push off to.
It was
go
10
over
meters from the line, and he just had one extra step.
All it took. Yeah, such power in the last bit. So that was really cool to see.
Very cool.
Sadly, Emmanuel Boer went from what looked like a guaranteed spot on the team. He was in the top 3 as they were pulling off like 150 maybe. There was like 3 that emerged in front, but he ended up falling with 50 meters to go. He wiped out, but it did look like he was tired and he was starting to like go towards the outside. So I'm not really sure the exact circumstances.
What he did was he pulled the move where he knew he was fading. Sean McGorty was coming up hard behind him from Bowerman Track Club. And Emmanuel Boer thought, you know what? I'll at least try to get in his way and see if I can slow him up. So he bends out to try to block Sean McGorty. And McGorty was a fair bit behind him still, so he just moved in. And Boer got a little turned around and tripped up. And
so it was sad to watch though. He ran a really strong race. Yeah. But Sean McGorty, he ended up going from 6th to 3rd to make his first U.S. team, and this is 10 months after undergoing Achilles surgery.
They've got some kind of crazy Achilles surgeon on that Bowerman Track Club payroll.
That's the guy I would want if I need Achilles surgery.
Yeah.
So 5th surgery in the last 5 years for McGorty.
Yeah, he's had some struggles, and so he's tried steeplechase, which was his prime event.
And that's a brutal event.
Early on. And it's just hard on. Well, it's hard on everything, but it's especially hard on the Achilles, as it were. So because he's had Achilles issues, it's clear like the steeplechase may just not be the event. Well, the 10,000 seems to be a good one for him too. So that was.
But that's great for him to make his first U.S. team.
Right.
It's very exciting.
Right. At a time when you wouldn't think, you don't think post surgery. It's like now's my chance.
Right.
You don't think that, and yet
I'm glad to hear it. You all know my personal story.
There we go.
I'm hoping for the
Jed's
same.
listening
same
right
thing,
now because he's just recently had his second Achilles surgery, so he's thinking, all right, there's a chance.
Well, there's more on that in a second to also encourage you. On the women's side, it was a story of 2 duels. Like full-on duels.
Two duels? Say that really fast. Two
duels.
Toodles.
Okay, I see where you're going with that. That's funny. The first duel was between Carissa Schweitzer and Alicia Munson.
Again, Bowerman Track Club and On Athletics Club. What are they doing?
Yeah. Well, I think the OAC is showing that there's more than one all-star team out there.
Indeed, they are.
And Schweitzer, she won in 30:49.56. And Munson came in second in 30:51.09. They were side.
Personal best for Alicia Munson.
Yeah, personal best for Alicia. She's a previous guest on our podcast. I'll make sure I link to that episode. But they were side by side in the final stretch. And then Schweitzer just ended up outrunning Munson in the last straightaway there. Just
nudged her. I mean, that was tight.
Yeah.
And you should know that Alicia Munson did the bold thing mid-race, fairly early in the race, where she just put the pedal down.
Yeah.
And so only Carissa Schweitzer was the only one who could keep that pace.
Yeah.
And so
she
that
said
was
she didn't
impressive.
know. Yeah, in a post-race interview with Let's Run, she said that she didn't know how many people would go with, and then she, after a bit, realized it was only Carissa, and she's like, I knew Carissa was like breathing down my neck, and she's like, and I know that she can run has she run sub 4 in the
I don't know
50 anyway, but she has some like amazing closing speed.
Yep.
So she ran Alicia really ran strong, because when Carissa first tried to pass her, Alicia was able to respond to that, and so they were running side by side for a bit there. So it was an amazingly strong race, and it was thrilling to watch. I keep using the word thrilling, but it truly was.
Indeed, it was.
But the second duel was between Natasha Rogers and Emily Einfeld for the 3rd place position. Infield. I have a friend named Einfeld, so that's why I said that. So I didn't say between the duel. So this is the spot for Team USA. That's what made it so exciting. This was for the podium to make worlds. There's a lot on the line there. And the two of them, this was even a closer battle, side by side. Emily ended up like coming by her, but Natasha responded, and she responded in a determined way and ended up just throwing herself over the line, claiming that third place spot.
Something. So that's Natasha Rogers of Hanson's Brooks Distance.
Yes, and she has been on the show as well, so I'll link to her episode too.
Very impressive racing for the 10,000 meter championships. It's just always, it's exciting. The United States has some world-class runners in these events, and so it's really cool to see them like not, no one's just walking away with this stuff. You got to fight for it, and I love that because while it's cool to see someone who's just like dominating things and it's fun, the races are where it's at, and these were some races.
Yeah, some great races.
Speaking of great races.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of great races, this U.S. Championship was like part of or preluding the pre-classic.
It is at the same venue. I mean, the pre-classic is a Diamond League event, so they're totally separate things, but they're just on the same track at the same time. It was on
the same docket because right after those 10,000 meter runs, there were 5Ks and a couple other races even that same night. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of all part of it, and it heightened, I would assume, the whole experience on both events to have it going on. Well, we're gonna start.
Well, let's go right to, because the 5,000 was that same evening, and then it was a star-studded, exciting field that did not turn out the way anticipated.
Well, it wasn't a surprise, but it could have been so many different runners' day because of how fast this field is. Samuel Tafira from Ethiopia, he was the 1,500 meter indoor champion this year.
Salomon Barega from Ethiopia was an Olympic champion last year.
Yeah, Mohamed from Canada, silver medalist in the 5K. Paul Chalimo from the USA, who's been on the podcast before, by the way, bronze medalist. So, and he's a previous medalist. So now he's a 2-time medalist. So there's a very strong field. But what happened,
And Aragawi himself, Berihu Aragawi from Ethiopia, who was the Diamond League champ last year. So these guys are all in the field, among other world-class athletes. And you're seeing this docket, and you're thinking this is going to be like a brutal race.
Right. Okay,
race
that's
to
what
the
you meant
line.
by your surprise.
Right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So like anyone's day for sure, but this is going to be crazy. And what was fascinating is it wasn't.
It wasn't crazy, guys.
It wasn't. It was a solo show from Ethiopia's Berihu Aragawi, who took off early in the race and nobody went with him, and he punished them for it. Brutally punished them for it.
It was quite shocking, actually. Yeah. Like, we thought, what happened? Did something happen? Did like everyone else fall or stumble, or
clearly,
did someone cut them off?
They thought he wasn't going to hold it. And
which
they
is crazy.
Paid the price because he's world class.
He's
like,
world
what do you
class.
think? The dude was Diamond League champ last year. He clearly knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Now, granted, okay, so he was 20 years old as Diamond League champ. So he's not like a veteran on the scene. So maybe his tactics are not familiar yet to people. They don't really know what he's capable of. But you don't do this in a world class scenario. You don't just let him go and think, he'll come back. Not a guy like that, or at least not dramatically. So
he was in the front by 2K and created the gap at that point. And his time, you're wondering, like, how fast did this guy run soloing it up front? 12:50.05. And he won by more than, wait for it, 16 seconds.
Brutal.
16 seconds.
Yep.
It's not a shock that he won, though. And this is why I wanted to say it wasn't a shock, because he set a world record of 12:49 on the roads for the 5K.
So
he holds a world record,
the world 5K road record.
But the fact that he won by 16 seconds, that is what is shocking. Not that he won.
Over Olympic champions.
Exactly.
Over record holders in their countries. Over,
multiple-time medalists. It's like, wow. That was insane.
It was just amazing. It was just amazing. Mm-hmm. It was incredible to watch. Well, other incredible things.
Yeah. This is an event that a lot of people are very invested in and look forward to at pre-classic, and it's the men's Bowerman Mile. Mm-hmm. And it looked to be a very, very strong field. But again, another shocking gap with the winner and the rest of the field. Jakob Ingebrigtsen.
I wouldn't call this a shocking gap, but Andy will.
Took the lead by 700 meters. So
now that's surprising.
He's like sitting. Usually he sits longer than that.
Yeah, Jakob Ingebrigtsen likes other people to do the work, and then he just punishes them for it. This time, though, clearly he was just not satisfied with the way the pace was unfolding midway through the race, because he took the lead and like started pushing, which is just not his game. But he also then
maybe it's his new game, Zach,
that he can win many games.
Now, I really enjoyed the runner-up.
Wait. Are you talking about you just like this guy more than the other guy?
Well,
that's not fair.
That's not fair, but we have a personal connection to him now that he's been on the show, but Oliver Hoare. But what I was really saying is I really enjoyed watching his race unfold because he ended up storming up on the outside. He was not in podium contention, and he stormed up the outside for second, passing 3 people in the final stretch. And it was, like we said, a very strong field. So Jakob Ingebrigtsen ran 349.76. Oliver Hoare, as I mentioned, storming up the side, got 350.65, which is a very fast time. Timothy Chariot in 350, and then Abel Kipsang of Kenya in 350.87.
It's, this is one of those things because second through fifth, all of them could kick anyone down.
I think it was Cole Hawker in fifth.
Right. It was Cole Hawker of the USA in fifth. So any one of those guys can kick anyone down. But Jakob Ingebrigtsen also can kick anyone down. And so you have this really incredible scenario where he basically, and maybe he did it on purpose. Maybe he's like, I know these guys are super fast guys. So I'm going to do the thing that none of them want to do, which is press from the front. Gives you the only advantage in this scenario. The only advantage you have if you go to the lead in the 1500 early is that they have to pass you in order to beat you, right? And so if your kick is as good as theirs, you win. You don't have to be better than them. You just have to be as good as them. So he plays that game, but it proved to be the fact that not only was his kick as good as theirs, it was better. And so while they're all world-class kickers storming down the home stretch, he's running away from them still. Yeah. What?
But may I also mention with all these guys' kicks how Oliver Hoare left them in the dust coming from behind Cole Hawker, Abel Kipsang, Timothy Chariot.
Look at these splits here.
I mean,
look at these splits
not in the dust, but it looked like in the final stretch when you see him pass
1/10
all 3
ahead
of them.
Timothy Chariot.
But I'm saying he was behind them,
yes.
so he closed faster when all these guys are such fast closers.
Don't rule him out. And everyone's saying, Cole Hawker does that kind of thing all the time too, but he put himself in a bad spot.
Yeah,
he was stuck behind Chariot and Kipsang, like right between them, but behind them, so he couldn't get anywhere. And Ollie Hoare's coming around the outside, so he has no space there too.
Yeah.
So, maybe Cole Hawker had an extra gear there that he just couldn't unleash. Who knows? But
that's how it works in races sometimes.
And there was more.
Yeah, there's more. And they didn't talk about it in
Let's
the
not
coverage.
Talk about NBC.
Okay.
They don't deserve our words.
Hey, well, there's actually, I loved Kara Goucher's some of her play-by-play.
Kara Goucher doesn't deserve our words. NBC. Okay, anyway.
But they did not mention this. But the high schooler in the race, Colin Salmon, sorry.
From Newbury Park.
Yeah, from Newbury Park.
Newbury Park boys.
He finished 13th, hitting the 3rd fastest time in U.S. high school history with the time of 3:56.24.
So the talk was like he was going for Alan Webb's record, the high school record. Alan Webb set that record at pre-classic. And so everyone's like, oh, he's going to go 21 years later. Yes, folks, Alan Webb set that record in 2001. That's the high school record.
And I remember that.
Well, you were indeed alive then.
I remember when he did. So
sentient. Yes. Now, Salmon has been running some incredible things, and there's no doubt that he is one of the, historically speaking, all-time greatest high school, middle distance especially, runners. But that record is brutal.
Yeah.
It's so fast.
It's so fast. So Alan Webb's time that he set was 3:53.43.
In high school.
But with pros, because we talked about last week with Gary Martin, this is with pros. So Alan Webb, 3:53.43. Jim Ryan from 1965, 3:55.3. We talked about him last week. That was his high school only record that was broken by Gary Martin. And then third all time is 3:56.24 by Colin this weekend.
Yeah. So number 3 all time.
That's saying something. Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's a very fast time.
Knocking on the door of Jim Ryan's fastest, which is just so good.
Alan Webb still has 3 seconds, though. I mean, that's
what are you going to do?
Crazy. He's, amazing. Now, the women's 1500,
also amazing.
I have, for some reason, I really enjoy watching Faith Kipyegon.
I know why.
Just why Jakob Ingebrigtsen. Zach loves watching Jakob Ingebrigtsen. I really like to watch Faith Kipyegon.
When you found out Faith Kipyegon had a child and came back to win a gold medal in the Olympics, you thought there is hope for mother runners everywhere. And it is indeed an affirming accomplishment. Yeah. And so it's well worth your credence. But when you say you have a very specific reason why Faith Kipyegon entered your radar, and it's just been a wonder to watch her.
And she always has just such a peaceful and joyous demeanor about her, and I also appreciate that. Like when she comes up to the line, she's not looking angry or distressed. She's looking
You're just saying that because when she was standing next to that one runner that looked grimacing the entire time. It was like,
but I just really appreciate her countenance, and she just seems to, Okay, so I digress into my fandom. Okay,
Faith Kipyegon of Kenya.
Yes, quickly became a 2-woman race between Faith Kipyegon and Gudef Tsegay, and Tsegay did try to shake it up with Kipyegon, so she was leading it. Gudef Tsegay was leading the race, and Kipyegon had passed her, and Tsegay tried to respond to it, but then Faith ended up storming her on the back straight before the final straight and ended up running 3:52.59, closing at a 60.4 last lap.
That's a 1500.
This is a 1500.
Not a full mile. Yep,
1500. So 3:52.59, which I didn't write this here, but it was her record, her meeting record that she broke. So she broke her own record for pre-classic.
Which, didn't she set that last summer? I don't know when she said it, but yes.
Yes, I think it was. But I didn't write it on here, but yeah. I think it was.
Showing her winning ways once more.
Yes. And then Tsegay, she ran 3:54.21 for second. And then Canadian record holder Gabriella Dupuis-Stafford took third in 3:58.62. And that was kind of a shakeup in the final stages there. She ended up passing some people to get that. And then I did want to mention USA's very own Sinclair Johnson improving her personal best time and getting 3:58.85 to become only the 10th American woman under the 4-minute marker for the 1500.
Very impressive performance.
Very impressive.
And Sinclair Johnson had an interesting post-race interview.
Yeah,
she
did.
Which was good to kind of hear her commentary on her experiences in the last year or so, and
switching coaches.
Yeah, just the reflection. It's always important, I feel, to. The athletes are not one-dimensional people, and so what brings them to the moment where they're capable of these kinds of performances? And she has some fascinating.
Yeah, it was great, and I like that's reminding me that back when we were talking about the close battles for the USATF 10,000, we were talking about the Achilles problems, and Sean McGordy had the Achilles surgery, but so did Carissa Schweizer. So
the Bowerman Track Club will injure your Achilles, but also repair it with surgery. And you'll be world class afterward. That's the.
But she did this
story.
it was not that long ago. It was after the Olympics. Before
I don't know what to say about that. Except you see that,
a fast recovery.
Like in the NFL, you'll hear someone say, "Oh, I had Achilles surgery in August, and then I'm playing, in November."
And she's said that she's really enjoying running pain-free because she wasn't during the Olympics. She said that she has not been running pain-free, and so she's been enjoying that, and she is excited to see what can come of it with her fantastic fitness that's only increasing as she moves her way to the US 5000 championship and then to Worlds, because she made the world team, obviously, as the champion.
Let's talk about the women's 800. Which was also an exciting event.
Yes.
And more of Andi fangirling.
20-year-old Keely Hodgkinson of Great Britain, she took the win in a world-leading time of 157.72. We've been talking about her a lot. She's one to keep your eyes on. And Zach talked about fanning. Ajay Wilson of the USA started at the very back of the field and moved her way up at the bell.
She does all sorts of different things in races.
She does. I like to see it too. But she ended up I don't know. I should have looked to see what her last lap split was, because she ended up passing everybody but Keely Hodgkinson, and she was making she was closing the gap.
It was just basically she just ran out of space to catch her.
Yeah. So that was really exciting to see, and that was in a time. Ajay Wilson ran a time of 158.06, her fastest time since July of 2019, according to Let's Run. So that's great to see her back at that very fast time. And then Raven Rogers of the USA was third in a time of 158.44. Very strong U.S. field of 800-meter runners. So that's exciting to see coming into Worlds as well.
Indeed.
Well, the USA is first, I should say.
Well, yeah. So they haven't made the world team yet. All right. Now, for the final installment of this World of Running segment, we just have to give a nod to the California High School State Meet.
Yes. Specifically, the girls. California State Meet held the fastest all-Californian race in state history for the girls' 1,600-meter run. Freshman Sadie Engelhardt won the event running 4:36.67.
Whoa.
That is so fast, and she's a freshman. That's the second fastest time ever in the California State Meet history.
Whoa.
Delia Frias did most of the pacing and led much of the race. She ended up taking second in a time of 4:37.09. That is the third fastest time.
I see a trend here.
In the state meet history. Samantha McDonald. I'm going to keep going, guys.
McDonald
ran 4:36.37 for third. Her time was the fourth in state meet history.
Wow.
And then
And
Mia
way
Chavez,
back in fourth place.
way back, running fourth was Mia Chavez in 4:41.71, a time that Mile Split tells us would have earned her the state title 7 of the last 8 state meets.
Bummer that she ran it this year and not any year previously.
I have to say, though, to be part of this all-Californian race, the fastest in history, this is exciting. That's
wow.
That's so fast. These young girls are so fast. I do have to say, though, it is hard because a lot of pressures can be on these girls. We've seen it before with a lot of girls moving to women's running. So it is very important to, although I elevate this and say how amazing it is and we can enjoy that and celebrate it, but also not to put pressure on young girls to continue to perform even through, the changing from girl to woman. So
I'm not entirely sure what exactly you're talking about, except
a little sidetrack rant.
This is a great way to, we love to kind of know, who are the people that are kind of up and coming into different categories in the sport, and so you hear some names like this and you think, yeah, you might be hearing some of those names again, over the years in college and beyond. So very exciting
very
stuff.
Likely.
Well, speaking of beyond, we are beyond the amount of time we planned for this episode. So let's just remember that foremost among the things that we like to do on the podcast is we like to hear your thoughts and answer your questions. So if you've got questions about running, training, anything related to the sport that we tend to share and adore, love of together, submit those questions simply and very easily by going to AtoZrunning.com/question. And there you will find an easy way to ask us what's on your mind.
And we love to do it. We love to connect with you. And it was exciting to see many of you in person at the Bayshore Marathon. Wherever you're going next, let us know. Let us see what you're up to. We love to connect with you and we love to encourage you. And hopefully our paths will meet. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.